Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moment. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Martial Universe Season 8 Part 21 based on novel. So let's start. The enormous formation spread across the sky. Countless mysterious threads of light extended from it. They intertwined with each other while emitting a cryptic and ancient aura. This formation was undoubtedly even more complicated than the burning sky array from before. Moreover, the various faint undulation emitted from within it caused many people's hearts to palpitate. This formation was naturally the ancient universe formation. However, the size of the ancient formation this time around was clearly the most terrifying it had ever been. What formation is this? Wu-kun's eyes contained some shock as he stared at the formation that seemed to cover the entire place. Although the formation had yet to be completely activated, he could already feel a heart-palpitating danger. How does this fellow create a formation anytime he wishes? How can he create such a complicated formation by himself? Ling Qingzhu's eyes locked onto the pale-looking young man in the sky. She clenched her jade-like hand and softly reasoned, "It is likely that he possesses the original form of this formation. Therefore, there is no need for him to create it. As long as he has enough yuan power, he will be able to activate it. However, this formation really exhausts yuan power at a rather frightening rate." Ling Qingzhu muttered. She could sense Lin Dong's rapidly weakening aura. Clearly, even though he had used the Great Desolation scripture to absorb the life force energy from a dozen-mile radius, he was only barely able to create such an enormous formation. What is this? The expressions of Lingzhen, Lei Qian, and the rest changed when this enormous formation appeared in the sky. The complexity of this formation before their eyes had far surpassed the burning sky array from earlier. Even with their eyes, they were unable to identify just what kind of formation it was. Although Lin Dong had used the ancient universe formation prior to this, its scale had not reached even a tenth of its current size. Therefore, Lingzhen and the rest were unable to recognize it. This brat is really troublesome to deal with. Lingzhen clenched his teeth. Inexplicably, he vaguely felt some unease in his heart. "Gather everyone together." Lingzhen's eyes flickered as he spoke in a deep voice. "Why?" Lei Qian frowned and asked. "I feel that something is not quite right." The unease within Lingzhen's eyes had become much richer. The formation in the sky caused him to feel as though he was sitting on needles. "Do you really believe that Brat has the ability to make all of our Yuan Gate disciples accompany those Dao sect trash in death?" Lei Qian frowned tightly. However, he hesitated for a moment when he saw the grave expression on Lingzhen's face. Finally, he waved his hand and the surrounding Yuan Gate disciples swiftly gathered towards him. Lingzhen finally sighed in relief when he saw this. Soon after, his eyes looked towards the sky in a dark and stern manner as he muttered, "I truly want to see just what else can you pull off. You really have many cards up your sleeve." In the sky, Yuan Kang lifted his head and watched the enormous formation extend. Subsequently, he lowered his head slowly as his dark gaze locked onto Lin Dong and spoke in a gloomy voice. "However, you must be really dreaming if you think that you can rely on this thing to deal with me." Yuan Kang's eyes were dark and stern. He took a step forward, while the spirit emblem hastily flickered between his brows. Waves after wave of majestic undulations suddenly swept out from his body. These undulations had actually reached the peak of the initial profound life stage. "I shall let you see just how ridiculous this trump card you are proud of is in my eyes." Monstrous Yuan power whizzed out from Yuan Kang's body like a flood. Finally, it transformed into a 1,000 feet large giant Yuan power figure. An extremely overwhelming aura was being emitted from the Yuan power figure. "Yuan God Codex, Yuan God Body." A deep icy cry was suddenly emitted from Yuan Kang's mouth. Soon after, two of his fingers formed the sword art as he suddenly slashed forward. Bang! The enormous Yuan power figure behind Yuan Kang lifted its giant hand when Yuan Kang slashed with his fingers. A terrifying ripple that seemed to link heaven and earth suddenly shot out. Finally, it was accompanied by an extremely frightening destructive force that hacked ruthlessly at the enormous formation in the sky. Bang bang bang! Waves of terrifying ripples swept out in a crazy fashion. The incorporeal air was completely blasted apart at this moment, while rumbling noises continuously resounded across the sky. Everyone could feel the power of Yuan Kang's attack. The remnant ripples from the Yuan power attack caused the scalps of some Peak 9 Yuan Nirvana stage experts to turn numb. A cold light gathered within Lin Dong's eyes when he saw this scene. Immediately, his hand seals changed abruptly, as the formation in the sky began to operate. Eh? Why is that formation operating in reverse? Has Lin Dong become stupid from being beaten up? Many sharp-eyed individuals managed to gain some clues when the formation moved. Immediately, several stunned voices sounded. However, Lin Dong ignored the many voices around him. As the formation rotated in reverse, an extremely bizarre light beam swiftly began to form at the middle of the formation. Swoosh! The light beam that had taken shape was merely a foot wide. It did not give off any majestic undulations. Yet, an arc was lifted on Lin Dong's lips when he saw it. He quickly pressed his finger forward, as the light beam suddenly shot downwards. Finally, it directly collided against the titanic Yuan power figure under countless watching gazes. Kai Kai! Unexpectedly, no loud sound was heard from the collision between the two. Neither was there a stalemate. Wherever the light beam passed, the majestic Yuan power on the giant figure began to strangely disappear at a shocking speed. The light beam swept across the horizon. Everyone was dumbstruck as they watched the light beam pierce the giant Yuan power figure. It looked as if it was completely unable to block the beam of light. What? Yuan Kang's expression had finally changed at this moment. He could feel even the natural Yuan power of the land being disintegrated wherever the light beam passed. What on earth is that? Panic finally surged into Yuan Kang's heart. His body abruptly withdrew and dodged the light beam that was shooting towards him. Swoosh! The light beam rushed past Yuan Kang. Finally, it shot into a Yuan Gate disciple below at lightning speed. Sizzle! That light beam rushed down. Soon, everyone watched as that Yuan Gate disciple's entire body strangely vanished after being hit by the light beam. Not even a trace of blood nor flesh remained behind. ****. The area around that disciple quickly became empty. All the Yuan Gate disciples were appalled as they watched this scene. A terrifying chill faintly gushed out in their hearts. A bloodthirsty smile vaguely appeared on Lin Dong's young pale white face when he saw the horror on those Yuan Gate disciples' faces. Traces of brutality and madness climbed out from deep within his eyes. Lin Dong, you are causing death. Yuan Kang's pupils contracted. As he gazed at Lin Dong's face, chill also surged out from deep within his heart as he cried out in a dark voice. Lin Dong merely smiled when he heard this. After which, he suddenly slammed his hand on his chest. A vomiting sound appeared as some essence blood was once again spat out from his mouth, before entering the large formation in the sky. After receiving Lin Dong's essence blood, a light curtain started to pour down from the ancient universe formation. Finally, it directly wrapped Yuan Kang and all the Yuan Gate disciples inside it. Lin Dong, what do you plan on doing? Are you intending to start a war between Yuan Gate and Dao Sect? Ling Shun cried out. His expression had suddenly changed when he saw this. One is allowed to do anything in this place, didn't all of you also share this thought earlier? A grin surfaced on Lin Dong's extremely pale face in response to Ling Shun's explosive cry. However, that smile caused the Yuan Gate disciples to tremble in fear. I have said it before. I will make all of you accompany those dead Dao Sect disciples. Lin Dong looked down at the Yuan Gate disciples from high up in the sky. His hand wiped the blood at the corner of his mouth. The somewhat soft and weak voice reverberated across the sky, causing everyone's scalp to suddenly turn numb. They gazed at the smiling pale-faced Lin Dong, only then did they truly understand. Lin Dong truly intended to exterminate every single Yuan Gate disciple. This fellow is a lunatic. A chill rose up from under everyone's feet, and directly charged to the top of their heads. This person, wasn't this too ruthless? Light rays poured down from the enormous formation in the sky, like a prison of light that trapped all the Yuan Gate disciples inside it. At this time, Lin Dong's crazy actions were already all too clear. He did not intend to let off even a single Yuan Gate disciple present. Gasp. By the time everyone understood this point, even the other 8 great super sect disciples could not help but gasp in their hearts. The faces of the top disciples from every faction even turned faintly pale. Clearly, they were greatly frightened by Lin Dong's insane actions. Although there were ultimately some deaths and injuries in previous great sect competitions, no one had truly thought of completely exterminating another party. Even Ju Tong had only killed 100 Yuan Gate disciples, as well as the little Yuan King of that competition. Yet, Lin Dong was currently attempting to completely exterminate every single Yuan Gate disciple. This ruthlessness was sufficient to make one's hair stand on ends. This lunatic, if he really kills all the Yuan Gate disciples, Yuan Gate would likely go crazy, Wu Kun muttered with a pale face. The number of Dao sect disciples who have died at the Yuan Gate's hands are not few in number, Zhu Ruo bit her lips and said. Earlier, she had witnessed just how desperate the Dao sect had been forced to become. Moreover, she knew that Lin Dong valued relationships. Given his character, he would definitely go completely crazy with rage when he saw the deaths and injuries of the Dao sect disciples. The tactics of Lin Dong when he was crazy with rage clearly caused even one's soul to tremble. Wu Kun was speechless. Soon after, he let out a sigh. The enmity between both parties could no longer be reconciled. The Yuan Gate disciples had planned on humiliating the Dao sect since the beginning. However, they never imagined that there was a murderous god like Lin Dong in the current batch of Dao sect disciples. The various sects cannot pursue anything done during the great sect competition. However, if Lin Dong really does as he intends, the relationship between Dao sect and Yuan Gate will freeze completely. Ling Qingzhu softly stated. Many Dao sect disciples had died at the Yuan Gate's hands in past great sect competitions. It was not that these debts would not be paid, but that the time was not ripe. Now, however, it is likely time for them to repay their debts. Ling Qingzhu's eyes watched the pale-faced skinny young man in the distance. He stood on the crimson furnace while the corners of his mouth contained an azure-like malevolence. Her expression was a little complicated. It seemed that this fellow really intended to turn this Eastern Xian region upside down. Fool that does not know your limits. Not letting a single of my Yuan Gate disciples off. Aren't you afraid of being choked to death by your big words? In the sky, Yuan Kang's expression had become exceptionally terrifying. He stared at Lin Dong in a sinister manner as he sternly shouted. All Yuan Gate disciples, take formation. Yuan Kang lowered his head and roared towards the Yuan Gate disciples below. Understood. Those Yuan Gate disciples hurriedly responded in unison when they heard Yuan Kang. Grim and determined gazes seemed to fill the sky as they looked towards Lin Dong. Subsequently, they quickly began to set up a formation. In an instant, an extremely vast and mighty Yuan power ripple began to unfurl. I shall see just what you can do to us today. Lei Qian stood within the formation. His face was ferocious as he looked at Lin Dong and spoke with a savage smile. Lin Dong, go ahead and be arrogant here. Once we leave Unique Devil region, you should be careful when appearing in Eastern Xian region. Our Yuan Gate experts will be very interested in sparring with you. Dao sect disciples, take formation. At the Dao sect direction, Ying Xiaoxiao suddenly cried out sternly when she saw the situation. Although the enormous formation in the sky was giving off extremely frightening undulations, the Yuan Gate disciples ultimately had the numbers advantage. Moreover, Lin Dong's current condition was not good. They could not simply continue watching at this point in time. The Dao sect disciples immediately responded in unison when they heard Ying Xiaoxiao's cry. They began to build a formation when Lin Dong waved his hand to and fro. Subsequently, a voice was transmitted over, this formation can only rely on my power. Ying Xiaoxiao knitted her umber black brows. Could it be that Lin Dong was planning to rely on his strength alone to fight against all the elite Yuan Gate disciples? Big sis, trust him. Just as Ying Xiaoxiao was about to speak again, Ying Huan pulled her sister's hand and said in a soft voice, "Are you also going to watch him mess around?" Ying Xiao spoke with anger. "I simply believe in him," Ying Huan smiled and said. Ying Xiao was taken aback. She glanced at the young lady beside her, before finally sighing helplessly. Perhaps this was all they could do now. From within Lindong's light formation, Yuan Kang looked at the formation that the Yuan Gate disciples had built. An ominous glint started to gather in his eyes, while his body slowly descended from the sky into the formation. Subsequently, he lifted his head and stared at Lindong with extremely viciousness as he spoke in a malicious voice. "Lindong, since you have already spoken, I shall also inform you here that none of your Dao sect disciples will leave this place." "Is that so?" Lindong grinned evilly as his body slowly rose into the air. Finally, it entered the enormous light formation. "I do not believe that this damned formation of yours will be able to block the combined attacks of so many disciples from my Yuan Gate." Yuan Kang's hand seal started to change. Immediately, monstrous light burst out from the Yuan Gate disciples' formation below. Majestic Yuan power gathered, before finally fusing into a several thousand feet large Yuan power light lion in the sky. Roar! The light lion roared at the heavens. This roar shook the land, immediately causing the ground to crumble as cracks frantically spread. "Watch how I break this damn formation of yours." Yuan Kang's expression was dark. With a sudden wave of his sleeve, the enormous light lion that had been formed by hundreds of Yuan Gate disciples immediately rushed out explosively. After which, it slammed into the light formation in the sky in front of countless shocked eyes. Its momentum caused one's legs to turn to jelly. Even an initial profound life stage practitioner could only back away from such an attack. "Who?" Lindong looked down from above at the light lion, which was being rapidly magnified in his eyes. Soon after, he breathed in deeply. His slender fingertip flicked, and an ancient stone bead appeared between his fingers. This stone bead was the final gift that the Great Desolate Tablet had given Lindong, the Desolation Beads. This thing had never been used by Lindong ever since it had landed in his hands. However, he had no choice but to use it today. Swoosh! Lindong gazed at the Desolation stone bead in his hand. Soon after, his arm suddenly jerked as the stone bead abruptly shot out, transforming into a flash of grey. The grey flash did not give off an earth-shattering aura. It appeared like the light of a firefly compared to the several thousand feet large light lion. However, it still flew forward without any regret and eventually collided with the lion under the numerous watching gazes. Sizzle sizzle. No loud sound appeared at the moment of impact. Everyone could clearly see a monstrous desolation force spread out from the stone bead. Under the erosion of the desolation force, the light lion, which was formed from the Yuan power of all the Yuan Gate disciples, actually started to wither at a shocking speed before finally dissipating. How is this possible? Yuan Kang and the rest watched this strange scene, as their pupils instantly tightened. An expression of disbelief finally appeared on their faces. They could not believe it. An attack that combined the full power of all the Yuan Gate disciples was actually dealt with by Lindong in such a bizarre manner. "Be careful." Yuan Kang's expression suddenly changed while he stared at the sky. He had seen a grey flash descending from the sky, and in the end, it landed on the formation above him. Bang! Just as the words, "be careful," escaped from his mouth, cracks swiftly appeared on the stone bead. Next, he could sense a power that borderlined on annihilation erupt from that tiny stone bead like a volcano. Boom! The entire sky seemed to tremble at this moment. The formation created by hundreds of Yuan Gate disciples tottered on the verge of collapse as the destructive force poured downwards. Break! Lindong's eyes were ice cold as he stood in the sky. A low voice echoed across the area. Boom! The annihilation-like fluctuation suddenly reached its peak as Lindong's voice echoed. Yuan Kang and the rest watched in horror as the cracks started to appear and spread on the formation established by the Yuan Gate disciples. Bang! The cracks spread. In the end, the formation completely exploded in front of countless terrified gazes. The Yuan Gate's final defense had crumbled. a loud earth-shaking noise rang out. The formation that shielded the Yuan Gate disciples exploded with a boom at this moment. Immediately, an extremely berserk energy frantically poured out in torrents. Puff, puff, puff. The formation exploded and the berserk energy swept outwards. Having lost their final line of defense, the faces of over 100 of Yuan Gate disciples immediately turned deathly pale as fresh blood was wildly spat out. The entire Yuan Gate camp was in complete disarray. After wreaking havoc for a while, the berserk energy gradually scattered. Countless eyes from the area immediately shot over. After which, they saw that the Yuan Gate camp had been turned upside down. The faces of several of them were filled with extremely horrified expressions. It was a disaster. The hearts of many people violently shivered when they saw this scene. Only then did they completely believe that what Lin Dong had said earlier was true. He was really going to finish off all these Yuan Gate disciples. Such ruthlessness. I am glad I did not offend him. Xue Ling from the sword sect felt his scalp turn numb as he watched this scene. His heart repeatedly rejoiced at the fact that he had not forcefully attacked the Dao sect disciples at the beginning. Lin Dong, I will rip you into 1,000 pieces. Yuan Kang was furious as he observed the damage done to the Yuan Gate disciples. Soon after, he lifted his head and gazed at Lin Dong, who was within the light formation. His roar was filled with a deep bitterness. Beside Yuan Kang, Lei Qian and Ling Zhen were also in a rather sorry state. Their expressions were extremely gloomy as they watched this scene. Furthermore, there was some unconcealable shock under this gloominess. They were truly unable to imagine how Lin Dong was actually able to destroy the formation created by so many Yuan Gate disciples, and still injure them to such an extent all by himself. Lin Dong lowered his head. His eyes were indifferent as he looked at Yuan Kang and the rest. A moment later, a voice that was void of any emotion slowly spread downwards. All the debts that you owe our Dao sect shall be completely collected by myself today. The seal formed by Lin Dong's hands abruptly changed after his words faded. One could see the ancient universe formation rotate in reverse once again as bizarre beams of light took shape at the center of the formation. Bastard, you dare! Yuan Kang sternly shouted. His expression changed when he saw this situation. Swoosh! Lin Dong ignored his shout. With a wave of his sleeve, the many bizarre light beams immediately came sweeping down from all directions. In the end, they shot towards the horrified Yuan Gate disciples from all directions like a grim reaper's scythe. Quickly retreat! Yuan Kang hurriedly cried out when he saw this. Kai Kai! However, the Yuan Gate disciples no longer had any way out after having lost the protection of the formation. All they could do was to release their Yuan power and form a protective layer outside their bodies. However, such a defense clearly had no effect against the light beams which contained the power of disintegration. Hence, everyone watched in horror as the Yuan Gate disciples began to disappear one after another when those light beams arrived. The disintegration force contained within the light beams directly erased them from this world. The scene before one's eyes was not one where blood and flesh flew in the air, and there were no screams of misery. There were only figures strangely disappearing one after another. This scene caused one to shudder. Everyone could only look on helplessly as the Yuan Gate disciples disappeared from this world at an astonishing speed. Within a short few minutes, less than half of the Yuan Gate disciples remained. You bastard, my Yuan Gate will not let you off. Lei Qian's eyes were scarlet red as he roared. Does your heart ache? Do you finally understand how it feels? An even more terrifying malevolence gradually surged onto Lin Dong's face as he lowered his head and laughed in a sinister manner. Didn't it feel good when you were killing my Dao sect disciples earlier? Come on, feel good for me now. Yuan Kang's eyes flickered crazily. There was an incomparable bitter resentment gathering within them. However, he quickly breathed in deeply, before he spoke with a stern voice, Lin Dong, we might have gone a little overboard earlier. However, what you are doing now is too much. If this continues, it will be no good for anyone. Why don't we both take a step back in this great sect competition? Your Dao sect has lost many disciples, but my Yuan Gate has also suffered greatly. Why don't we just let this matter rest? Boss! Lei Qian immediately cried out with dissatisfaction when he heard this. Shut up! Yuan Kang suddenly shouted. His eyes were filled with a murderous aura as he stared at Lei Qian. Only then did the latter shut his mouth. This fellow's formation is far too terrifying. We are completely unable to break it. It is unwise to compete with him in ruthlessness at this stage. From the side, Lingzhen spoke in grim voice. Ha ha, you are indeed worthy of being the little Yuan King. Being able to bend according to the circumstances, in the sky, Lin Dong laughed. However, he slowly shook his head. However, do you think that I, Lin Dong, am someone who hesitates when doing something? Lin Dong, if you really force us to that step, you might end up suffering too. Yuan Kang spoke in a grave voice. In that case, let us see just who will suffer in the end. Lin Dong smiled savagely. Since the situation had already reached this stage, it was impossible for him to stop. He was a decisive person to begin with, while Yuan Kang was a ruthless man and also knew how to endure silently. Who could rest and dine in peace when such an enemy remained at large? You asked for it. Yuan Kang had also been completely enraged by Lin Dong. His eyes were dark and stern as he looked towards Lingzhen and Lei Qian, and spoke in a grave voice, attack together. The Yuan power in that brat's body is already exhausted. He will not last much longer. Yes? Upon hearing this, the Lingzhen duo also nodded with cruelness in their eyes. All remaining Yuan Gate disciples, abandon your defenses and launch an offensive formation. From the situation earlier, it seemed that the strange light beams possessed the power of annihilation. An ordinary disciple was practically unable to block it. In that case, they might as well risk their lives and attack. Yes? Although those Yuan Gate disciples had frightened faces, they were also aware that it was pointless to say anything now that they had been pushed to such a stage. Deep within their hearts, however, they were vaguely regretting pushing the Dao sect disciples so far. If it were not for that, Lin Dong might not become so crazy. Swoosh! The figures of the Yuan Kang trio rushed out almost simultaneously. Majestic Yuan power whizzed out, and the trio displayed their strongest martial arts. Yuan God Codex, world returning to the Yuan. Spirit God Codex, spiritual vein calamity finger. Thunder God Codex, thunder demon prison. Rumble. The monstrous Yuan power showed some traces of being somewhat crazy at this moment. The trio had all pushed their strengths to the limit. Frightening attacks that caused one to have difficulty breathing flew towards Lin Dong. Swoosh swoosh. Behind them, numerous Yuan Gate disciples also unleashed their strongest attacks which frantically unfurled towards the light formation. This desperate attack appeared to cause the land to tremble. Lin Dong watched this scene as scarlet red surged out in his eyes. In the next moment, he raised his head and heartily laughed at the heavens. Both of his hands spread outwards as threads of blood shot out from the pores all over his body, causing him to instantly transform into a bloody figure, while his body also shrunk a size. If you wish to struggle with your lives on the line, I shall accompany all of you too. Threads of blood shot out. Finally, they were rapidly absorbed by the light formation. Immediately, the entire large formation suddenly gained a faint scarlet red color. Subsequently, the formation began to rumble as it rotated. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Bizarre light beams that contained the power of disintegration once again shot out from the formation, and the Yuan Gate disciples below started to swiftly disappear at an astonishing speed. While the Yuan Kang trio's attacks were continuously disintegrated and dissipated, they forcibly relied on their majestic Yuan power that had merged together to withstand the disintegration. Subsequently, they swiftly approached Lin Dong, who was within the light formation. They could sense that the current Lin Dong was truly at his limit. Perhaps all they needed was a light attack and they would be able to kill him. Bastard, your good days are over. Once we finish you off, I will send all those Dao sect disciples to accompany you in the underworld. Lei Qian's expression was savage as his roar rumbled across the sky. Under the watch of countless unblinking gazes, the Yuan Kang trio steadily neared Lin Dong. Everyone held their breath at this moment. They knew that the final outcome would determined in one go. Heh heh. Lin Dong, whose body was drenched in fresh blood, forcefully opened his eyes. He watched the trio rushing over with faces filled with malice. A slight arc slowly lifted on his face that was now so bloody that it looked rather terrifying. Soon after, both of his hands formed a series of strange seals as a soft cry was emitted from within his mouth. Halt! A mysterious undulation swiftly rippled outwards in a circular manner. After which, the Yuan Kang trio's charging figures were momentarily stilled. Swoosh! At that very instant, an extremely thick light beam suddenly rushed out from behind Lin Dong's body the moment those three stilled. Finally, it ruthlessly bombarded their bodies before their horrified eyes. It's over. When the light beam bombarded the trio's bodies, Lin Dong's exceptionally hoarse and weak voice quietly reverberated across the entire area. This video will end here.